Welcome. Today we're going to talk about building a technology roadmap. And what is a technology roadmap? Well, basically it is a timeline with it's a timeline that helps you determine how to release a product on time. And we'll get into that. And usually it's made usually in some kind of one-off software like Excel. Here's the example that's based on. But in this case, I wanted to use it to create this in Python because if it's made in Python, we can automate this kind of one-off process of making the bar charts and everything. So we're going to talk about an introduction as to what technology road mapping is, what we were trying to do, as well as what we accomplished, how we accomplished it, and then also some ideas for the future. So again, a technology roadmap is it's really more of a form of communication. You have a finished chart, a visualization, you present it to a manager, and it gives them an idea of how to release the technology based on a given timeline. And these technologies are made up of many different, let's say, factors, including well, let's get into it here. Here's an example technology roadmap here. We have our business drivers at the top, basically the business environment. We also have the markets that are made up of that environment, then the products going in to support that market, and then the technologies available to create those products. Usually a technology roadmap has a lot of arrows going from one artifact to the next. What I wanted to try and do was make it so that we wouldn't have to use arrows at all. So for example, in this picture here, we have the technology roadmap. We have a technology down here called quantitative emergence. It is depended on by these other products here at the top. Product 1, the common simulation testbed, the autonomic system, social awareness. So that's how it's diagrammed here in this project, where the symbol for the driver is on the left, and then if something's on the right side of the driver, it depends on that. So again, we see it here with arrows, but we don't want that because it's not aesthetic. We want to use this new concept of symbols. I think I'm the first to do this. Okay, so back to our presentation. Right, we see our technology roadmap here, and let me just show you what we came up with as a result here. So here's a technology roadmap created here in Python. Here's the end result, one of the end results. We see that same technology roadmap we saw earlier, just here in Python. It has most of the idea here. Not bad for, a couple hours of coding and a lot of thinking on top of that with how to extract the data. And here we see on the right, we have our phases here. We can kind of do some selection and turn off some things if we like. Nice part of a library. So we have our navigation and selection, and we have our detailed zoom, where we zoom in, even select an area to zoom into, and kind of have that nice vector zoom going on there. We also have the polar chart of scores. You'll see some more relevance soon, but here's a factor that technology number 1 has a very high score here, and this is kind of a nice way to present it because you can kind of see all the factors kind of closer together and easier to compare to each other. I thought it'd be the best way. So let's go back to the presentation here. So yeah, there's the technology roadmap. You have all these layers of the technology layer, the market, the business, and there's kind of an upward, downward dynamic here where the market business here at the top kind of pushes on its dependencies in the bottom, and vice versa. And so also you can kind of tally a score for these drivers. It's an arbitrary way of doing it, but there's a method I used where quality function deployment, that's kind of outside the curriculum, but you can find an arbitrary way of scoring these and kind of put it on there in a nice graphical way. In the way I did it in Python, it would have taken a lot more time to do it this way, so I decided just to make the polar chart instead, and maybe it's an improvement because you can kind of see things just visually compared in a different way. So again, back to the visual part, we can see that instead of using these arrows, for example, here, we're using symbols instead, which is nice innovation, let's say. And again, you've seen the charts there, so it's kind of a proof of concept for making software for technology road mapping. So you can kind of create these, on the fly versus having to make a one-off in some desktop publishing software. So that's one of the successes there. And so how do we do it? We just took an Excel file and then imported it into a data frame in Python. Um, there were some cells I had to kind of columns I had to recreate in Excel, so I wouldn't have to do them in Python, but that's for probably better future research. Oh, but okay. Once you have your technology roadmap done, you can determine a strategic path. Like certain drivers will have a certain score, and you can say, oh, well, this one had a high score. Over here on the right, we can see, oh, T1 technology one had a pretty high score, and we see M1 market one here at the top had a high score. Okay, these two had a pretty high score. I guess they're pretty important. So you can kind of base your strategy on that, and even kind of tell a story, saying, okay, well, these technologies happened first, so that's kind of more of the integration phase, and it's really more of a storytelling kit, but you can make a strategy with it. And so again, we can see these connection between the scores and the elements of a technology roadmap here. So again, the benefits of this is, all kinds of strategic benefits here, kind of outside the scope of the course, but great visualization. And if we look into some future research that we can look into later, there's some aesthetic things here and there, but what if we could, we have three axes here. We have a time axis, time dimension, a driver dimension being technologies, products. We have time, drivers, and then the scores associated with those. So we've got three dimensions. Why not make a three-dimensional graph? So it's something to think about in the future. Here's an example where we have one dimension at the bottom, another dimension of scores, and then our kind of Z kind of depth axis is time in this case. And can we find some patterns in this kind of topographical terrain here? It's kind of interesting to research. So